The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the San Jose, California depot, and Penelope Vaughn pressed her trembling hand against the worn leather seat as she peered through the dust-clouded window at the town that would become her new home. She had traveled nearly 3,000 miles from Boston with nothing but a battered carpetbag, the clothes on her back, and a heart full of desperate hope that somehow, against all reason, this arranged marriage to a stranger would give her the fresh start she so desperately needed. The year was 1872, and the California frontier still held the raw promise of reinvention for those brave or foolish enough to seize it. The driver yanked open the door, and Penelope gathered her skirts as she stepped down into the afternoon heat. San Jose bustled with activity. Miners and ranchers and merchants moving through the wide dirt streets between wooden buildings that still smelled of fresh pine and ambition. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, scanning the crowd for the man whose letters had promised her safety, security, and a home where she could finally belong. A tall figure separated from the shadow of the general store, and Penelope's breath caught in her throat. The man who approached wore dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. But even from a distance, she could see the broad shoulders and confident stride of someone who had spent his life working the land. He stopped a few feet away and removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes the color of summer sky that studied her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Miss Vaughn." His voice was deep and steady, with a warmth that seemed genuine despite the obvious uncertainty in his expression. "Yes, you must be Benjamin Marlowe." She forced herself to meet his gaze directly, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She had come too far to turn back now. Even if her future husband looked nothing like she had imagined and everything like the kind of man who could break her heart without even trying, Benjamin held his hat against his chest and nodded slowly. "I am. Welcome to San Jose." He glanced at her single bag and something shifted in his expression, a softness that eased the hard lines around his mouth. "Is that all you brought?" Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks, shame mixing with the exhaustion that had settled into her bones during the long journey west. "I left Boston with very little. My circumstances were such that I could not afford to bring more." She lifted her chin, refusing to apologize for poverty that had been thrust upon her through no fault of her own. "Your advertisement said you were looking for a wife willing to work hard and build a life together. I may not have possessions, but I have hope that we can make something good here." For a long moment, Benjamin simply looked at her, and Penelope braced herself for rejection, for the disgust or disappointment she had seen so many times in the eyes of Boston society after her father's business collapsed and left her family destitute. But when Benjamin spoke, his voice carried none of that judgment. "Hope is enough to build everything together, Miss Vaughn." He stepped closer and offered his arm. "Let me show you the ranch. It is not much yet, but it is ours if you will have it." Relief flooded through her with such force that her knees nearly buckled. She took his arm carefully, feeling the solid strength beneath the worn fabric of his shirt, and let him guide her toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As they rolled out of town toward the rolling hills that surrounded San Jose, Benjamin began to talk. His voice filled the space between them with stories of the land he had claimed 5 years ago when he first came west from Missouri. He spoke of the struggles to build a herd, of droughts and hard winters, of neighbors who had helped him raise the barn and dig the well. He did not paint a picture of easy prosperity, but rather of honest work and slow progress toward something lasting. Penelope listened and watched the landscape unfold around them. Oak trees dotted the golden hills, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing near a creek that sparkled in the afternoon sun. The air smelled different here, dry and clean with hints of grass and earth that bore no resemblance to the coal smoke and crowded streets of Boston. For the first time in months, she felt something loosen in her chest, a tightness she had not even realized she carried. "Why did you send for a mail-order bride?" The question escaped before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. "Forgive me, I should not pry." Benjamin glanced at her, and one corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "It is a fair question. You have a right to know who you are marrying." He guided the horses around a bend in the road, and a small ranch house came into view, weathered wood surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. "I have been alone out here for too long. I built this place thinking I would have someone to share it with. But the truth is there are not many unmarried women in San Jose, and those who are here have their choice of suitors with more money and better prospects than a cattle rancher trying to make his way. And yet you thought a stranger from Boston might be willing." Penelope kept her tone light, but the question carried weight. "I thought someone who knew what it was to struggle might understand what I am trying to build here." Benjamin pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "I will not lie to you, Miss Vaughn. This will be a hard life. There will be days when you wonder why you left civilization for this rough country. But I promise you that I will work every day to give you a home worth having, and I will treat you with the respect and care you deserve as my wife." Penelope turned to look at him fully, studying the honest lines of his face and the directness in his blue eyes. She had known him for less than an hour, but already she sensed a quality of character that had been sorely lacking in the men she had known back east. Benjamin Marlowe might not have wealth or refined manners, but he had integrity, and in this moment that meant more than all the empty promises she had heard in Boston parlors. "Then I think we may suit each other well, Mr. Marlowe." She managed a smile. "And please, call me Penelope. If we are to be married, we should at least use our given names." "Penelope." He said her name carefully, as though testing its weight. "That is a pretty name. You can call me Ben." Benjamin always sounded too formal for ranch work. He climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands at her waist were strong but careful, and he set her down gently before reaching for her carpet bag. "Let me show you inside. It is not fancy, but it is clean and solid." The house was indeed simple. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and two smaller rooms that Ben explained served as his bedroom, and a storage room that could be converted to another bedroom if needed. The furniture was handmade but sturdy, and everything was neat and well maintained. Penelope walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the table, noting the mended curtains at the windows and the stack of firewood beside the hearth. "You keep a tidy home," she said, impressed despite herself. Ben set her bag down near the door and removed his hat again, running a hand through his dark hair. "A man learns to take care of things when he is on his own. I will sleep in the barn tonight, give you privacy until we are properly married. I thought we could go into town tomorrow and speak with Reverend Thompson if that suits you." Penelope felt her heart begin to race again. Tomorrow? She would be married tomorrow to this man she had just met. The reality of what she had done, traveling across the country to wed a stranger, suddenly felt overwhelming. But what choice did she have? There was nothing left for her in Boston, no family who would take her in, no prospects for employment that would not leave her destitute within months. At least here with Ben, she had a chance at building something real. Tomorrow would be fine. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to calm the panic that threatened to rise up and choke her. "Thank you for your consideration. I will leave you to settle in then. There is food in the cold box, bread and cheese and some leftover stew if you are hungry. I need to check on the cattle before dark, but I will be nearby if you need anything. Ben hesitated at the door, looking as though he wanted to say something more, but then he simply nodded and stepped outside. Penelope stood alone in the quiet house and let the tears she had been holding back finally fall. They were not tears of sadness exactly, but rather a release of all the tension and fear and desperate hope she had carried for so long. She had made it. She was here. Tomorrow she would marry Ben Marlowe, and whatever came after that, at least she would not be alone anymore. The evening passed in a strange stillness. Penelope unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin Ben had left for her, and ate a small supper of bread and cheese because her stomach was too knotted with nerves to handle anything more. She could hear Ben moving around outside, the sound of his boots on the porch and the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to the horses. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast California sky, she lay down in Ben's bed, surrounded by his scent of leather and sun-warmed cotton, and tried to imagine what her life would become. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of Boston and her mother's face the day Penelope told her she was leaving, the mixture of grief and relief that they would have one less mouth to feed. When dawn light filtered through the curtains, Penelope rose and dressed in her best gown, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean and mended. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked pale and tired, but her green eyes held a determination that had carried her this far and would have to carry her further still. Ben knocked softly on the door just as she finished. "Penelope, are you ready?" She opened the door to find him standing on the porch in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked younger in the morning light, and she realized with a start that he could not be more than 26 or 27, only a few years older than her own 22. The thought comforted her somehow that they were both still young enough to build a life together, to grow into whatever this marriage would become. "I am ready," she said, and meant it. The ride into town was quieter than the day before. Ben seemed lost in his own thoughts, and Penelope was content to watch the landscape roll by and try to calm the butterflies that danced in her stomach. San Jose looked different in the morning light, less intimidating and more simply frontier practical. They stopped in front of a small white church, and Ben helped her down from the wagon with the same careful gentleness he had shown before. Reverend Thompson was a kind-faced man in his 50s who greeted them warmly and did not ask too many questions about the speed of their courtship. Clearly, he had performed this service for other mail-order brides and understood the practicalities that brought people together on the frontier. He led them into the simple chapel and began the ceremony with a straightforward efficiency that somehow made it feel more real than Penelope had expected. When Ben took her hand to slide the simple gold band onto her finger, his fingers were warm and steady. "I, Benjamin Marlowe, take you, Penelope Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded wife." His voice carried through the small space with quiet conviction. "I promise to provide for you, to protect you, and to honor the vows we make today for as long as I live." Penelope's own voice shook slightly as she repeated her vows, but she looked into Ben's blue eyes and found an unexpected steadiness there. "I, Penelope Vaughn, take you, Benjamin Marlowe, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand beside you, to work with you to build our home, and to honor the vows we make today for as long as I live. Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Thompson beamed at them. "You may kiss your bride, Benjamin." Ben leaned down slowly, giving Penelope time to pull away if she wanted, but she stood still and let him press a gentle kiss to her lips. It was brief and chaste, but something warm flickered through her at the contact, a hint of possibility that maybe this marriage could become something more than just a practical arrangement. They signed the marriage certificate, and Reverend Thompson shook their hands and wished them well. Ben paid him a small fee, and then they were walking back out into the sunshine as husband and wife. The world looked exactly the same as it had an hour before, but everything had changed. Penelope was no longer a desperate woman fleeing Boston's judgment. She was Mrs. Benjamin Marlowe, a rancher's wife with a home and a future. Ben helped her back into the wagon and climbed up beside her. "I thought we might stop at the general store, pick up some supplies. If there is anything you need, anything at all, just tell me." "I do not want you to spend money you cannot afford," Penelope said quickly, but Ben shook his head. "You are my wife now. It is my responsibility to provide for you, and I will not have you going without." He guided the horses toward the store. "Besides, I have been saving for this. I knew I would need to outfit the house properly once you arrived." Inside the general store, Ben introduced her to the proprietor, Mrs. Chen, a cheerful Chinese woman whose family had come to California during the gold rush and stayed to build a successful business. Mrs. Chen congratulated them warmly and showed Penelope around the store, pointing out fabrics and kitchen supplies and small luxuries that made Penelope's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Ben bought her yard goods to make new curtains and a dress, a good cast iron skillet to replace his battered one, coffee and sugar and flour, and a beautiful shawl in deep green that Mrs. Chen insisted would match her eyes. Penelope protested at the extravagance, but Ben simply smiled and paid for everything, loading the supplies into the wagon with satisfaction. "You did not have to do all that," Penelope said as they headed back toward the ranch. "I would have made do with what you already had." "I know you would have." Ben glanced at her, and the warmth in his expression made her heart skip. "But I wanted you to have something nice. You came all this way trusting that I would take care of you. The least I can do is make sure you have what you need to feel at home." Back at the ranch, they unloaded the supplies together, working in a companionable silence that felt natural despite how new everything was. Ben showed Penelope where he stored things in the kitchen, explaining his routines and asking if she wanted to change anything now that she was running the household. She appreciated that he asked rather than simply expecting her to adapt to his ways, and she began to suggest small improvements that would make cooking and cleaning more efficient. The afternoon passed in domestic tasks. Penelope began preparing supper while Ben went out to work with the cattle. She found a strange comfort in the simple work of cooking, chopping vegetables from Ben's small garden and stirring the pot of stew that simmered on the stove. This was her home now. These were her responsibilities, and despite all the uncertainty, she felt a growing sense of belonging. When Ben came in at dusk, dirty and tired from a long day of work, he stopped in the doorway and inhaled deeply. "That smells amazing." Penelope felt pleasure at the compliment. "It is just stew, nothing fancy." "It smells like home." Ben washed up at the basin and sat down at the table she had set. "I have eaten my own cooking for 5 years, and I promise you this is a vast improvement." They ate together as the light faded outside and the first stars appeared. Ben told her about the cattle, about his plans to expand the herd next spring, about the challenges of finding good grazing land and protecting the animals from predators and thieves. Penelope listened and asked questions, genuinely interested in understanding the work that would support them. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, an awkward tension settled over them. This was their wedding night, and Penelope knew what was expected, but Ben seemed to sense her nervousness. He stood and moved toward the door, reaching for his hat. "I will sleep in the barn again tonight if that is all right with you. I know this is all very sudden, and I do not want to rush you into anything you are not ready for." His voice was gentle, giving her the choice. Penelope felt a rush of gratitude and something else, a tender warmth toward this man who was being so patient with her. "Ben, you do not have to sleep in the barn. This is your home. I just need a little time to adjust to everything." Ben nodded slowly. "The storage room is empty now. I can put a bedroll in there, give us both some space until you feel more comfortable." "Thank you." Penelope met his eyes, wanting him to understand how much his consideration meant. "I know this arrangement is not what most people would call romantic, but I am grateful for your kindness." "We have time, Penelope. We have our whole lives to figure this out." Ben's smile was soft in the lamplight. "I want this to be a real marriage eventually, but I am willing to wait until you are ready." Over the following days, they fell into a routine that felt almost natural. Ben rose before dawn to tend the cattle and work on ranch improvements. Penelope kept the house, cooked meals, and began exploring the property, learning the boundaries of their land and the rhythms of ranch life. They ate breakfast and supper together, talking more easily each day, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Penelope learned that Ben had come west after his parents died, leaving behind a small farm in Missouri that held too many sad memories. He had worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saving every penny until he could buy his own land and start his own herd. He spoke of his cattle with obvious pride, and Penelope could see that he was good at what he did, patient and knowledgeable about the animals in his care. In turn, she told him about Boston, about her father's importing business that had collapsed when one of his ships sank in a storm, taking with it not just cargo but all their family's savings and prospects. She described the slow slide into poverty, the way former friends had turned away, the desperate search for employment that yielded nothing suitable for a gently raised woman with no practical skills. She explained how she had seen Ben's advertisement in a newspaper and recognized it as perhaps her only chance at a decent life. "I am sorry you went through all that," Ben said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the hills. "No one should have to experience that kind of loss." "It taught me what matters," Penelope replied. "Back in Boston, I thought happiness came from fine dresses and social standing. Out here, I am learning it comes from having enough to eat, a solid roof overhead, and someone who treats you with respect." Ben looked at her in the fading light, and something shifted in his expression. "You deserve more than just respect, Penelope. You deserve to be happy." "I think I could be happy here," she said softly. "I am starting to feel like I belong." As weeks passed, Penelope threw herself into making the ranch house truly feel like home. She sewed new curtains from the fabric Ben had bought, planted herbs in a small garden near the kitchen door, and organized the storage areas with ruthless efficiency. Ben built her a chicken coop, and she delighted in gathering fresh eggs each morning, proud of this small contribution to their household. The physical space between them began to close. Ben no longer slept in the storage room but in his own bed, while Penelope took the smaller bedroom. But their hands would brush as they passed each other in the kitchen, and sometimes Ben would touch her shoulder or her waist in passing, small gestures of affection that made her pulse quicken. One afternoon, Penelope was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She turned to see Ben riding hard toward the house, and fear shot through her. Something was wrong. He dismounted quickly and strode toward her, his face dark with anger. "There are rustlers working the area. Old man Henderson just lost 15 head of cattle last night. I need to ride out with some of the other ranchers, see if we can track them down before they hit another spread. He was already moving toward the house to gather supplies. I want you to stay inside after dark. Keep the rifle by the door. I do not think they will come to the house, but I need to know you are safe. Penelope followed him inside, her heart pounding. How long will you be gone? Could be a few days. We will track them as far as we need to. Ben loaded his rifle and checked his ammunition, moving with quick efficiency. I am sorry to leave you alone so soon. I will be fine. Penelope forced confidence into her voice even though fear churned in her stomach. Just promise me you will be careful. Ben stopped his preparations and looked at her, really looked at her, and then he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. The embrace was sudden and fierce, and Penelope clutched at his shirt, breathing in his scent and feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. I will come back to you, he said into her hair. I promise. Then he was gone, riding out with his rifle across his saddle, and Penelope stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the hills. The house felt enormous and empty without him, and she realized with a start that she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the comfort of knowing he was nearby. The thought of something happening to him made her chest tighten with real fear. The first night alone was long and filled with strange sounds that made her jump. She kept the rifle close and barely slept, listening for any sign of trouble. The second day dragged, and she kept herself busy with chores, but her eyes constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of Ben's return. By the third night, she was exhausted and worried and angry at herself for caring so much about a man she had known for only a few weeks. On the fourth morning, she was feeding the chickens when she heard horses. She grabbed the rifle and ran toward the house, then stopped in relief when she recognized Ben's bay gelding. He looked tired and dirty, his face shadowed with beard growth, but he was whole and unharmed. Penelope set down the rifle and ran to meet him as he dismounted. Did you find them? We found their camp. Sheriff Dawson arrested 3 men and we recovered most of Henderson's cattle. Ben swayed slightly on his feet and Penelope grabbed his arm to steady him. When did you last eat? Yesterday morning, maybe. I am not sure. He let her guide him toward the house, and she marveled at how he leaned on her, trusting her to support him. She settled him at the table and quickly prepared food, watching as he ate with the focused attention of a man too tired to do anything but refuel his body. When he finished, she brought water for him to wash, and he looked up at her with something raw in his expression. I thought about you the whole time I was gone. I kept thinking about how you might be here alone and afraid, and it made me sick that I could not be here to protect you. His voice was rough with exhaustion and emotion. I was fine, Penelope said, but her voice shook. I was frightened, but I was fine. I was more worried about you. Ben stood and reached for her, and this time when he pulled her close, she wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. I missed you, she whispered against his chest. I did not expect to miss you so much, but I did. Penelope. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, and his eyes were intense with feeling. I know this started as a practical arrangement, but somewhere along the way, you became important to me. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, and when I was out there chasing rustlers, all I could think about was coming home to you. Her heart was racing so hard she thought it might burst. I feel the same way. I came here hoping for safety and a home, but I found so much more. I found you. Ben cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs stroking her cheeks with infinite tenderness. May I kiss you? Really kiss you? Penelope nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. When Ben's lips met hers, it was nothing like the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was deep and searching, full of weeks of growing attraction and the relief of his safe return. Penelope melted into him, her hands sliding up into his hair, kissing him back with all the feelings she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Penelope Marlowe. I did not think it was possible to fall in love so quickly, but I have." "I love you too," she breathed, and saying the words felt like opening a door she had not known was locked. "I love you, Ben." He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise. "Will you be my wife in truth? Not just on paper, but in every way." "Yes," Penelope said simply. "Yes." That night, Ben did not sleep in his own room. Penelope came to him shyly, wearing only her nightgown, and he welcomed her into his bed with gentle hands and whispered endearments. He made love to her slowly, carefully, aware that this was new for her, and wanting to make it good. Penelope discovered that the passion she had read about in forbidden novels was real, that her body could respond to his touch with a fierce joy that left her gasping his name into the darkness. Afterward, lying tangled together in the sheets, Ben traced patterns on her bare shoulder and spoke softly into her hair. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret coming here." "I already know I will not regret it," Penelope replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "This is where I was meant to be." The seasons turned, and their love deepened with the rhythm of ranch life. Penelope learned to ride, awkward at first but determined, until she could accompany Ben when he checked the far pastures. They worked side by side to expand the herd, Ben teaching her about cattle breeding and land management, valuing her opinions as they made decisions together. The isolation that might have driven some women mad became a source of peace for Penelope. After the suffocating judgment of Boston society, the wide open spaces of California felt like freedom. She made friends with the few neighboring ranchers' wives, women who came from similar circumstances and understood the particular challenges and rewards of frontier life. Mrs. Henderson, a weathered woman in her 40s who had been in California since the gold rush days, took Penelope under her wing. She taught her how to preserve food for the winter, how to treat common injuries and illnesses with herbs from the land, and how to shoot straight enough to protect herself if needed. The older woman seemed to recognize something in Penelope, a determination to not just survive but thrive, and she respected it. "You are doing well, child," Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon as they worked together in Penelope's garden. "Benjamin Marlowe is a good man, and you are a good match for him. I can see it in how you work together." Penelope felt warm with pride. "I was so frightened when I first arrived. I did not know if I could adapt to this life. We are all frightened at first." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were kind. "But fear passes when you find your purpose. You have found yours." By the following spring, Penelope suspected she was carrying a child. She kept the knowledge to herself for a few weeks, wanting to be certain before she told Ben, but the signs were unmistakable. Her monthly courses had stopped, her breasts were tender, and she felt a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed to cure. She finally told Ben one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I have something to tell you." Her voice shook slightly with nervous excitement. Ben took her hand, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to say. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." She watched his face carefully, hoping he would be pleased. For a moment, Ben simply stared at her, and then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He let out a whoop of joy and scooped her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her back down. "A baby, Penelope, that is wonderful." He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still, flat belly, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you for giving me everything I ever wanted." Penelope ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes wet with happy tears. "We are building a family, Ben. We are building everything together, just like you said." The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Penelope's fears. Ben became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, though she insisted she was perfectly capable of maintaining the house and garden. They spent long evenings planning for the baby's arrival, converting the small storage room into a nursery, building a cradle from smooth pine that Ben sanded until it was soft as silk. Mrs. Henderson agreed to attend the birth when the time came, having delivered more babies than she could count over her years in California. Her presence gave Penelope confidence, knowing she would not be alone during what she had heard could be a difficult and dangerous time. In late autumn, as the hills turned gold and the air took on a crisp edge, Penelope's labor began. It was long and painful, hours that blurred together in a haze of contractions and Mrs. Henderson's calm voice telling her to breathe, to push, to rest. Ben stayed nearby, holding her hand when she needed him, stepping outside when Mrs. Henderson ordered him away, his face pale with worry. Finally, as dawn light crept through the windows, the baby emerged with a lusty cry that made Penelope laugh and sob at the same time. Mrs. Henderson cleaned the infant quickly and laid him on Penelope's chest, and she looked down into her son's red, wrinkled face with overwhelming love. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, smiling. "A healthy, strong boy." Ben came in at the sound of the baby's cries, and when he saw Penelope holding their son, he openly wept. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, complete and perfect. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "What about Thomas?" Ben suggested softly. "After your father." Penelope felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. She had told Ben about her father, about the good man who had tried so hard to save his business and had died broken by his failure. "Thomas Marlowe. I love it." They called him Tommy, and he grew fat and healthy on Penelope's milk, filling the house with his cries and coos and eventually his laughter. Ben proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him even as an infant about the ranch that would one day be his. Life settled into a new rhythm with Tommy at the center. Penelope learned to manage household tasks with a baby on her hip, and Ben built an addition to the house, 2 more bedrooms because he said he wanted a large family if Penelope was willing. She was more than willing, delighted by motherhood and by the deepening bond between her and Ben. 2 years after Tommy was born, Penelope delivered a daughter they named Margaret after Ben's mother. The little girl had her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn determination, and she ruled the household from her cradle with imperious cries that had both parents jumping to attend her needs. With 2 small children, the ranch became a busier, noisier, happier place. Ben expanded the cattle operation, hiring a young ranch hand to help with the daily work now that he had more responsibilities at home. Their herd grew, their reputation for quality stock spread, and the ranch that had been a struggling enterprise when Penelope arrived became genuinely prosperous. But success did not change who they were at their core. Ben remained the hardworking, honest man Penelope had married, and she remained his partner in every sense, managing the household accounts, making business decisions alongside him, raising their children with love and firm discipline. One evening, when Tommy was 5 and Margaret was 3, Ben came in from the barn to find Penelope at the stove, stirring a pot of soup while both children played on the floor nearby. He stopped in the doorway and simply watched, this scene of domestic contentment that he had dreamed of during his lonely years alone. Penelope looked up and caught him staring. "What are you thinking about?" Ben crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I am thinking about the day you arrived on that stagecoach, carrying nothing but a carpet bag and more courage than you probably realized. I am thinking about how you looked at me with those green eyes and told me you had hoped that we could build something good together." Penelope leaned back against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her belly. "I remember. You told me hope was enough to build everything together." "It was," Ben murmured. "We took that hope and built all of this. A home, a family, a life worth living. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Marlowe." She turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and sweet, tasting like forever. "We built it together, Ben. That is what makes it perfect." The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and love and growth. Tommy grew tall and serious, following his father around the ranch with devoted attention, learning everything Ben could teach him about cattle and land management. Margaret was bright and mischievous, keeping Penelope constantly busy but filling the house with laughter. When Tommy was 7 and Margaret was 5, Penelope gave birth to twins, boys they named Daniel and Samuel. The arrival of 2 infants at once threw the household into cheerful chaos, but they managed with help from Mrs. Henderson and the older children, who were fascinated by their tiny brothers. San Jose continued to grow and modernize around them. A railroad line came through in 1876, bringing easier access to markets for Ben's cattle and more goods for the general store. The town built a proper school, and Penelope enrolled Tommy with a mixture of pride and sadness that her firstborn was growing up so fast. But despite the changes around them, the ranch remained a constant, a place of hard work and simple joys. Ben and Penelope fell into bed exhausted most nights, surrounded by the sounds of their children sleeping, and counted themselves blessed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ben surprised Penelope by closing the barn early and taking her for a ride to a spot overlooking their property. They dismounted and stood together looking out over the land they had built together, the house and outbuildings, the corrals full of cattle, the garden and orchard Penelope had cultivated. "I want you to know something," Ben said, taking her hand. "These 10 years with you have been everything I hoped for and more than I dreamed possible. You took a chance on me, on this place, and you made it into something beautiful." Penelope squeezed his fingers, her eyes scanning the landscape that had become so dear to her. "I took a chance on hope, and hope brought me to you. Every day I am grateful for that decision." Ben pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate gold locket. "I know we did not have much when we married, but I wanted to give you something to mark all we have built. Something you can pass down to Margaret when she is older." Penelope opened the locket to find tiny photographs inside, one of her and Ben on one side and the 4 children on the other. Her throat tightened with emotion. "It is beautiful, thank you." Ben fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle on her skin. "Thank you for building this life with me, for being my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, for being everything." She turned in his arms and kissed him with all the love and passion that 10 years together had only deepened. "We are not finished building yet, we have so much more ahead of us." "Then let's keep building," Ben said against her lips. "Together." The children grew and the ranch prospered. Tommy proved to have a natural talent for animal husbandry, improving the herd's bloodlines with careful breeding decisions that impressed even the older ranchers in the area. Margaret showed an unexpected gift for numbers, helping Penelope manage the accounts and proving to have a sharper business mind than anyone expected. The twins, Daniel and Samuel, were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes, but also showed the kind of loyalty and teamwork that Ben and Penelope recognized as valuable traits for ranch life. They worked together naturally, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. When Tommy turned 15, he asked his father if he could start taking on more responsibility. Ben agreed, proud of his son's maturity and work ethic. Together, they expanded the ranch's operations, buying additional grazing land from a neighbor who was retiring and moving east to live with his daughter. Margaret, at 13, was already catching the eye of boys in town, much to Ben's dismay and Penelope's amusement. "She is too young for courting," Ben grumbled one evening after they had attended a church social where several young men had hovered around Margaret. "She is the same age I was when I started noticing boys," Penelope pointed out, "and she has a good head on her shoulders. We raised her well." "That does not mean I want her getting married and leaving home," Ben said stubbornly, and Penelope laughed at his protective father act. "We have years before we need to worry about that, and when the time comes, we will make sure she chooses someone worthy of her." The twins at 11 were still more interested in mischief than girls, and Ben and Penelope let them enjoy their childhood while also teaching them the values of hard work and responsibility that would serve them well as adults. Life was not without challenges. Droughts came, forcing them to sell off part of the herd one difficult year. Sickness swept through the area, and they spent anxious weeks nursing the children through fevers and coughs, grateful when everyone recovered. Ben broke his leg in a fall from a spooked horse and had to spend 6 weeks letting it heal while Penelope and Tommy managed the ranch work. But through every challenge, they faced it together, their partnership stronger for having weathered so many storms. Penelope had learned that love was not just the passion they shared in the dark hours of night, but also the quiet support they offered each other through daily struggles, the way they could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, the comfort of knowing someone had your back no matter what. On a spring morning in 1887, 15 years after Penelope had first arrived in San Jose, she stood on the porch watching the sunrise and marveling at the life she had built. She was 37 years old, mother to 4 thriving children, wife to a man she loved more with each passing year, and owner of a successful ranch that supported them all comfortably. Ben came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, a familiar gesture that never failed to make her feel safe and loved. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything," Penelope said simply. "I am thinking about that terrified girl who climbed off the stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and hope. I am thinking about how far we have come." "Hope is a powerful thing," Ben murmured against her hair, "but it was your courage that made all this possible. Your willingness to take a chance on a stranger and a dream." Penelope turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face, noting the lines that time and sun had etched around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. "We took the chance together. That is what made it work." Inside the house, they could hear the children beginning to stir, Tommy's voice calling to the twins, Margaret singing softly as she got dressed. These sounds of family, of life continuing and growing, were the sweetest music Penelope had ever heard. "Come on," Ben said, taking her hand. "Let's go make breakfast. We have a full day ahead of us." As they walked inside together, Penelope felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had come to California seeking escape from poverty and judgment, hoping merely to survive. Instead, she had found love, purpose, and a richness of life that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the connections she had built. Years continued their steady march, bringing new changes and challenges. Tommy, at 18, began courting a sweet-faced girl named Sarah Collins, daughter of a rancher from the next valley over. Ben and Penelope liked her immediately, recognizing in Sarah the same determination and warmth that had drawn them to each other. "She reminds me of you," Ben told Penelope one evening after Sarah had joined them for supper. "She has that quality of being willing to work hard for what she wants." "Tommy has chosen well," Penelope agreed. "I think they will be happy together." Tommy and Sarah married the following year in a ceremony that brought together ranching families from across the region. Watching her eldest son exchange vows, Penelope remembered her own wedding day, the mixture of fear and hope that had filled her heart. She was grateful Tommy's marriage began with love rather than desperation. But she also knew that love alone was not enough, that he and Sarah would have to work to build their life together just as she and Ben had done. Ben built Tommy and Sarah a small house on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough for family dinners but far enough for the young couple to establish their own household. Tommy continued working the ranch alongside his father, and Sarah proved to be as capable and hardworking as Penelope had predicted. Margaret at 16 was being courted by several young men, much to her amusement and her father's continued dismay. She was in no hurry to marry, announcing that she wanted to see more of the world before settling down. Penelope secretly supported this ambition, remembering her own limited horizons before coming west, wanting more for her daughter. "Let her take her time," Penelope advised Ben when he worried about Margaret's independent streak. "She knows her own mind, and she will choose wisely when she is ready." The twins at 14 were finally starting to settle into more mature behavior, though they still had a talent for finding trouble. They had grown tall and strong, valuable help with the heavy ranch work, and Ben talked about eventually splitting the property so each of his sons could have land of their own. "We have built something worth passing on," he told Penelope one night as they lay in bed, the house quiet around them. "Our children and grandchildren will work this land long after we are gone." "It is a good legacy," Penelope agreed, snuggling closer to his warmth. "We took hope and built something that will last." When Penelope was 43 and Ben was 47, they became grandparents for the first time. Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, and Penelope felt her heart expand with a new kind of love as she held the tiny infant. Ben was equally besotted, and they spent hours with their granddaughter, marveling at the continuation of their family line. Margaret finally settled on a suitor when she was 20. A young lawyer from San Francisco named Charles, who had come to San Jose to open a practice. He was educated and ambitious, but also kind and genuinely smitten with Margaret's sharp wit and independent spirit. After a proper courtship, they married and moved to San Francisco, though Margaret promised to visit often. "My daughter, the city lady," Ben said with a mixture of pride and sadness as they watched Margaret drive away in Charles's fine carriage. "She is following her own path," Penelope reminded him, "just as we taught her to do, and she is happy." The twins surprised everyone by announcing they wanted to go into business together, buying and selling horses rather than focusing solely on cattle. Ben was skeptical at first, but Penelope encouraged him to give them a chance. "They work well together, and there is a growing market for quality horses. Let them try." Daniel and Samuel proved their mother right, establishing a successful horse trading business that complemented the ranch's cattle operations. They traveled throughout California buying and selling stock, and their reputation for honest dealing and good animals spread quickly. Ben and Penelope settled into the comfortable rhythm of middle age, still working hard but also knowing when to rest, still passionate about each other but with a deeper, steadier kind of love that had been forged through decades of shared life. They had become the elder statesmen of the local ranching community, people others came to for advice and support. One evening, as they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren gathered around the table Penelope had set countless times, Ben stood and raised his glass. 25 years ago, I placed an advertisement for a mail-order bride, not really believing anyone would answer. Then Penelope stepped off that stagecoach and my life changed forever. He looked at his wife, his eyes warm with love. She arrived with nothing but hope, and I told her that hope was enough to build everything together. I did not fully understand what I was saying then, but I do now. Hope is not passive. It is active. It is choosing to believe in possibility and then working every day to make that possibility real. That is what we have done together, and I am grateful for every moment. Penelope stood and went to his side, taking his hand. We built it together, Ben. That is what makes it precious, not the land or the house or even the family, though I love all of those things. What makes it precious is that we chose each other, every day, through good times and hard times. We kept choosing each other, and that made all the difference. Their children and grandchildren applauded, and the evening continued with laughter and stories, and the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love and who love you in return. As the years continued to pass, Ben and Penelope gradually turned over more of the ranch operations to Tommy and Daniel and Samuel. Though Ben still rose early most mornings to check on the cattle and Penelope still kept the household running smoothly. They had more time now for quiet moments together, for long rides to their favorite spots on the property, for sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the California hills in gold and purple. Margaret made them grandparents 3 more times, and Sarah gave Tommy 2 sons to go along with daughter Rose. The ranch house filled regularly with grandchildren running and playing, and Ben built a larger dining table to accommodate all the family gatherings. "We are blessed," Penelope said one evening as they cleaned up after one of these gatherings, the house finally quiet again. "More than blessed," Ben agreed, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance to music only they could hear. "We are rich in all the ways that matter." When Ben turned 55, he finally admitted that some of the heavier ranch work was getting harder. Tommy gently suggested it might be time for Ben to focus on management and let the younger generation handle more of the physical labor. Ben struggled with this shift at first, his identity so tied to being a working rancher, but Penelope helped him see that guiding the next generation was just as important as doing the work himself. "You are not retiring," she told him firmly. "You are teaching. There is a difference." Ben settled into this new role, becoming a mentor not just to his own sons, but to younger ranchers in the area who sought his advice. He and Penelope also began traveling a bit, visiting Margaret in San Francisco, and taking the train to see parts of California they had never explored. These trips reminded them both of how far they had come. The young woman who had arrived in San Jose with nothing and the lonely cowboy who had sent for a mail-order bride were now respected members of their community, with a family legacy that would continue for generations. On a spring morning much like the one when Penelope had first arrived 30 years earlier, she stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out over the land she had come to love. She was 52 years old, her brown hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with years of sun and laughter and occasional tears. But her green eyes were still bright with the same determination that had brought her west all those years ago. Ben came to stand beside her, his own hair now more silver than dark, his body still strong but showing the effects of decades of hard work. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "You ever regret it?" Ben asked, though he thought he knew the answer. Coming here, marrying a stranger, building this life. Penelope turned to look at him, this man who had become her entire world. Not for a single moment. This life, this family, everything we built together is exactly what I was meant to have. I just had to be brave enough to come and find it. We found each other, Ben corrected gently. And we built something beautiful together. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting golden light across the ranch that had been the foundation of their life together, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had boarded that stagecoach in Boston as a desperate young woman fleeing poverty and judgment, carrying nothing but a carpetbag and the fragile hope that somewhere in the Wild West there might be a place for her. She had found so much more than a place. She had found purpose, love, family, and a sense of belonging that she never could have imagined in those dark Boston days. The mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing but hope had discovered that hope, when combined with courage and hard work and love, truly was enough to build everything. Ben and Penelope continued to live on the ranch for many more years, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the family. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of the family they had created, a testament to the power of taking a chance on hope. When Ben finally passed away at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep after a full day of working with the horses he loved, Penelope grieved deeply, but also felt grateful for the 53 years they had shared. She knew she had been loved completely, and she had loved completely in return. She lived another 5 years, remaining on the ranch with Tommy and Sarah, spoiling her great-grandchildren and passing on the stories of how she and Ben had built everything from nothing. She told them about arriving in San Jose with a single carpetbag, about Ben's words that hope was enough to build everything together, about the life they had created through determination and love. On a quiet evening in the spring of her 80th year, Penelope sat on the porch of the ranch house one last time, watching the sunset paint the California hills in colors of fire and gold. She could almost feel Ben beside her, his hand in hers, his voice murmuring that they were blessed beyond measure. "We did it," she whispered to the evening air, to the memory of the man who had been her partner in all things. "We took hope and built everything together, just like you promised." As the last light faded from the sky, Penelope closed her eyes and thought of all the moments that had made up her extraordinary life. The journey from desperate mail-order bride to beloved matriarch of a thriving family. She had learned that home was not a place you came from, but something you built with your own hands and heart. That love was not something you found, but something you created through daily choices to show up and care and work together. The ranch that Ben and Penelope had built from hope and hard work continued to thrive long after they were both gone, passed down through generations who remembered the story of the mail-order bride who had arrived with nothing and the cowboy who had promised her that hope was enough. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still lived in houses on the property, still told the story of Benjamin and Penelope Marlowe, who had proved that the greatest riches in life came not from what you possessed, but from what you built together with courage, commitment, and love. In the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of the couple who had started it all. Visitors who came to pay their respects often paused to read the words carved beneath Penelope's name, words chosen by her children to capture the essence of her remarkable journey. She arrived with hope and built everything. And beneath Ben's name, the words he had spoken on that first day and had proved true through 53 years of marriage. Hope is enough to build everything together. The story of their love, their courage, and their legacy lived on in every fence post and barn board, in every child born to their descendants, in every sunset that painted the California hills in gold. They had taken a chance on each other, two strangers brought together by circumstance and desperation, and they had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. In the end, that was what mattered most, not the struggles they had endured or the challenges they had overcome, but the love they had built and shared and passed on to those who came after. Penelope had arrived in San Jose with nothing but hope, and together with Ben, she had turned that hope into a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is take a chance on tomorrow, trust in the possibility of love, and believe that hope truly is enough to build everything together.